Hello, this is Mateo, and I'm the Youth Program Coordinator at Rainbow Resource Center, and today we're going to be talking about Transgender Day of Remembrance. In this presentation, we will be talking about Transgender Day of Remembrance, so please be aware that although this presentation is intended to be educational, due to the nature of this day, we will be covering some topics that may feel heavy. So expect some mention of sex work, violence, and discrimination. So for this presentation, we will be talking about what is Transgender Day of Remembrance, some helpful definitions, why is Transgender Day of Remembrance important, Trans Day of Remembrance, We Remember, We Resist, which is a short video we will be watching together. We will be talking about how is Transgender Day of Remembrance observed, and then we'll be going over some resources. So what is Transgender Day of Remembrance? Well, Transgender Day of Remembrance, or TDOR, was started in 1999 by transgender advocate Gwendolyn Ann Smith as a vigil to honor the memory of Rita Hester, a transgender woman who was killed in 1998. The vigil commemorated all the transgender people lost to violence since Rita Hester's death and began an important tradition that has become the annual Transgender Day of Remembrance. So we're going to cover some helpful definitions. One of the reasons we're going over these definitions is to help you understand discrimination and the impacts of different elements that take place and why people are discriminated against. So the first definition is intersectionality. So intersectionality is a theory used to understand how aspects of a person's social and political identities, like their culture, religion, race, combine to create different ways of discrimination and privilege. So privilege is kind of like an advantage or an immunity to certain situations. So examples of these aspects are gender, caste, sex, race, class, sexuality, religion, disability, physical appearance, and height. So for example, I'm a Latinx person and I'm also trans. So those two pieces of my identity do intersect, and that will impact how I navigate certain environments and how I'm treated in those environments. The next definition is institutional racism or systemic racism. And that is a form of racism that is logged as normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues. The next definition is colonialism or colonization, which is defined as control by one power over a dependent area of people. In practice, colonialism is when one country violently invades and takes control of another country or land and claims the land as its own and sends people, such as settlers, to live on that land. So a really good example of colonialism or colonization would be Canada. So we live on land that actually doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the indigenous people of this land. So settlers came many years ago and decided to claim this land as theirs, and then came a bunch of settlers to start living on the land. And this really negatively impacted the people who originated from this land. So some more helpful definitions to consider to really understand discrimination and transphobia. Well, let's start with the word transphobia. So you may have heard of that word. So I'm just going to explain what that is. And it is the discrimination of and negative attitudes towards transgender people based on their gender expression. And if you've likely heard of misogyny, which is the hatred and denigration of women and characteristics deemed feminine. So trans misogyny is the merge of these, the negative attitudes expressed through cultural hate, individual and state violence, and discrimination directed towards trans women and trans and gender nonconforming people on the feminine end of the gender spectrum. So thank you for Listening to those definitions, we're going to move forward to why is Transgender Day of Remembrance important? Well, transgender people experience a lot of barriers, violence, and discrimination just for existing. Transgender people experience high rates of domestic and sexual violence. Trans and non-binary people are often the targets of transphobic hate crimes and violence, especially trans women and non-binary folks who are more feminine presenting, as we just talked about trans misogyny. Trans and non-binary people, especially those with intersecting identities such as Indigenous people, Black people, immigrant and refugee people, and people of color, are especially vulnerable to violence because of historical and ongoing systemic racism and colonization. Transgender people do not only lose their lives to violence, many trans folks do not receive the care, support, and resources everyone requires in order to thrive. So unfortunately, some transgender people sometimes end their lives. So with more education, people are becoming aware of some of the issues faced by transgender people, but there is still so much more that needs to be done. Transgender Day of Remembrance is important because it acknowledges and validates hurt faced by our community due to the violence and injustices so many of us have faced and continue to experience. So overall, it's important to also affirm and acknowledge those who have lost their lives. Just like any healing, this is a time for the community to mourn our losses collectively. So that's a bit of why Transgender Day of Remembrance is important. So we're gonna watch this video titled Trans Day of Remembrance, We Remember, We Resist. So just a little content warning that the video contains brief descriptions of violence and police oppression. The description of this video is, we raise awareness of the institutional and systemic violence that trans people face every day. We share our stories, we protest, and we fight. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit play.
Many of the systems and institutions that are supposed to protect us are set to erase our existence. They weave invisible threads through profiling, abuse, and violence. They make us invisible and make it impossible for us to live. But we resist. Kelly, a migrant trans sex worker, was murdered in France by someone who pretended to be a client. Her colleagues were scared to report that she went missing. In countries all over Europe, Central Asia, and across the globe, the laws push us to the margins of society. Sex workers, undocumented migrants, trans people. They exclude us, they try to forget us, they say we are illegal, but we are still here. Gabi, a trans woman in Georgia, was beaten up on the street, but she was the one who was arrested and sentenced to 5 days of imprisonment. We have learned not to call the police. They will not believe us. They refuse to recognize the violence against us and punish us instead. They try to take our rights away, but we claim them. Against all odds, we organize, share our stories, protest, and fight so that this stops happening to more of us. We come together, we remember, we resist.
Excuse me. Thank you so much for watching that video with me. It's super important to acknowledge some of the issues that a lot of trans women face, and this kind of speaks to some of those definitions we went over in the beginning of this presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so how is Transgender Day of Remembrance observed? Well, on Transgender Day of Remembrance, 2S LGBTQ plus communities globally observe this day by attending or organizing a vigil on November 20th to honor all those transgender people whose lives were lost to anti-transgender violence that year. So this is a way of learning about the violence affecting the transgender community and to mourn our losses as a community. So it really does help with community healing. Vigils are typically hosted by local transgender advocates or 2S LGBTQ+ organizations, and sometimes they're held at community centers, parks, places of worship, and other venues. The vigil often involves reading a list of names of those lost that year. And I just want to point out that this year, at least locally, we're not meeting in person. So I encourage you to take a look at what people are doing virtually. So I know if you do a search, you may find some online vigils taking place on November 20th, which is today. Check out the youth program Instagram account. I believe we may have posted some information for a local online vigil that is taking place today. So I just wanted to share that fact, and we're gonna move to the next slide. So I'm gonna be talking about some local resources for Winnipeg, Manitoba. In the description of the video below, I'll have some information for the actual contact info for some of these resources. So I don't have them on this slide, just to save some space so it doesn't look too busy. So please take a look at the information below if you would like to check out some of these resources or connect with the resources. So the first one, ironically, is not local, which is Trans Lifeline's hotline. So I believe they are from the US, but there is a phone number for Canadian folks to reach them. So Trans Lifeline is a peer support phone service run by trans people for trans people and questioning peers. So when you call that lifeline, if you need to talk to someone immediately, do so, and you will be connected with another trans person interested in supporting you. So moving forward, we're going to talk about Klinic and some of their services. So Klinic does have a crisis line. It's free and confidential counseling, support and referrals for people who are suicidal, in crisis, or struggling to cope. Of course, please be aware that when you do call, or if you decide to call, you probably won't be speaking to another transgender person, excuse me, but the people who do work on the crisis line do receive some training that does incorporate working with 2S LGBTQ+ folks. But I just wanted to give you the heads up that the line itself is not like the Trans Lifeline, where you're not guaranteed to be talking to another transgender person. So moving forward, Klinic also has a trans health clinic. So they work with you to help you achieve your transitional needs, medically speaking. So if you're in a place where you need more information for medical transition, and that's something you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to connect with them. However, please be mindful that they see people ages 16+. So now we're going to move forward to resources from Rainbow Resource Center. So the first resource is counseling. So Rainbow Resource offers short-term counseling for 2S LGBTQ+ people, their partners, parents, or families. And continuing with resources offered at Rainbow, we have a variety of social support groups. So the first one on the list is Winnipeg Transgender Support Group. This social support group offers a monthly opportunity to meet other gender variant folk, share information and experiences, learn from one another, and support each other. We also have the Trans Masculine Support Group, which is a social support group for trans masculine individuals. We have PFADI, which stands for Parents, Family, and Friends of Trans Individuals. So they're a social support group that is here to talk, listen, and support and work to understand the thoughts, feelings, and conflicts that often go hand in hand with having a loved one who identifies as transgender. Rainbow also has a Trans Love Line, which is a social support group for partners and people who love those under the trans umbrella. Rainbow also has a social support group called Blink, and they are a play group for gender creative and trans kids ages 12 and under. And I just want to point out that with the exception of Blink, all the social support groups at Rainbow are for folks who are 18 plus. So please be mindful of this. And of course, we also have a youth program who you can connect with. We see participants between the ages of 13 to 21. So we are a good resource if you're in need of any sort of support. We can also see what we can do in terms of connecting you with resources that we may not offer. So thank you so much for being being present with me and watching the videos and going through some of the content for this presentation. Here is just a list of references. So that is where I got some of my information from. And I will also have that below with the other pieces of information for you. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I will have all that information below as well. So thank you again for joining me, and I really hope you have a great rest of your day. And please do not hesitate to reach out if you do feel you do need support. Okay, well, thank you so much, and hopefully we get to see folks in person in the near future.